Welcome to Enhancing Web Applications with Cloud Intelligence. My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. And today we're actually doing a repeat of a session here at Ignite that was earlier, but there were some issues with the demos and the recordings, so we are repeating it. Well, let's get started. Okay, before we get started, actually, there are some resources you can use to get the code we're going to show you today and also the slides. And there's also some recordings up there as well. So ACMS MOD30 is where you can get everything. We also have the code on GitHub, and that'll be linked from ACMS MOD30. All right, so in this learning path, we have 5 sessions. The first 2 sessions are moving your applications from on-prem to the cloud and moving your data from on-prem to the cloud. So at this point, basically what we're doing is we've got the application on the cloud now. It's running exactly as it was on-prem. Everything's functional. It scales better now, and it's a little more reliable. We also have a ton of other features and functionality that we can add to the application now that it's in the cloud. So we're actually going to show you today some examples of things you can do to enhance your application using cloud services without actually touching any of the core code in the application. So we're going to actually add this wish list functionality to the application itself. I'll show you a little bit here. So this is the actual live website. It's the e-commerce website that we're using, Tailwind Traders. You can see a full functional demo of this at tailwindtraders.com. For this particular one, we also have a mobile app. And the mobile app itself has the same functionality that you have in the original app, and it has a couple of extra things that we've added. So I'm actually going to show you a demo of everything that we've added to the application through this wish list functionality, and then we're going to break down how we actually added it. So here's an example. So I'm going to say start smart shopping by taking a photo. And what this does is it actually uses a photo from my phone. I can take a photo, or I can just use one that we've already downloaded, and I've already downloaded a couple. So we'll use one of these. I'll grab a wrench, and that actually saves it to a wish list. That says at the bottom here, photo uploaded to wish list. And what that does is actually puts it into blob storage. So if you look at blob storage now, there we are, and I refresh it, it not only uploaded the picture, it also created a thumbnail. So if you look at the original picture, here it is. Takes a second to load up. More than a second. There it is. So that's the initial full picture, but it also generated a thumbnail. And the thumbnail is, of course, a little smaller. And that's actually what we use in our Android app when you look at the wish list. So if I go into my menu here and I say wish list, you'll see it's got the actual application. Hold on. There we go. A little rendering issue there. This is a mirroring of the mobile app that we're looking at right now. It says close-up of a tool. So there's 3 things we did there. We actually created the facility for uploading the photo, but then when it was added to the blob, it also created a thumbnail of that photo, and it analyzed the photo to create a description of what the photo is. So there's 3 basic things that we're using for that. We're using Azure Functions, and we're actually using Event Grid to scale that function. And then we're using machine learning, cognitive services through Azure to analyze the photo and put in a description of what we think it is. So we're actually going to break down how we did that for the rest of the session. All right, back to slides. So we're going to have an introduction to serverless because we're using Azure Functions, which is part of serverless. We're going to talk about adding enterprise messaging to your app through Event Grid and a few other things. We're going to enhance your app with integrations. We use something called Logic Apps to actually orchestrate the whole process. And then we're going to plug that into Cloud Intelligence, and that's the part that actually produces that description for you, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And mobile engagement with Xamarin. So we actually have another demo at the end where we connect to Twitter and we post a notification on the mobile app. And we're going to talk about how we integrate all that as well. Okay. So a little bit of an introduction to serverless. The evolution of application platforms is important to review at this point. Everybody's probably familiar with having your on-prem applications and all the questions and issues and problems that you have to resolve when you have your own management infrastructure, your own data center, your own electricity, your own air conditioning for the data center. All those things have to be taken into consideration, not just what operating system I'm using or anything like that. And that's really, that's what was the original appeal of the cloud. The original format of the cloud was virtual machines and being able to actually virtualize some of that work away from the data center. So you no longer had to manage the actual data center, but you did still have to function on what is the operating system I'm using? Does it have the latest patches? Am I secure from threats? And things like that. Then cloud providers provide platform as a service, PaaS. And that is a way to actually manage the operating system for you and control the process by which your applications are managed, by which they're served, by scaling and performance. So that's good, and that's great. And by the way, each one of these things, IaaS, PaaS, and now serverless, has their own pluses and minuses. I think this microphone's a little off. There we go. It's a little rumbly. Okay, so the advantage of serverless is you no longer have to worry about any of the underlying infrastructure. You can basically borrow another server. It's kind of one of those jokes about the cloud is, the cloud is just someone else's computer. In this case, it really, really is. You're just borrowing a piece of someone else's computer to run your application on. It's still secure, it scales, and it's very, very robust and easy to set up. So that's really the appeal of serverless. But let's actually talk a little bit about what serverless is. It's an abstraction of servers. So it's not necessarily serverless. It's just that you'd never have to see or worry about any server that you're running your code on. It's event-driven, and it scales instantly. I'm going to show you a little demo of scaling in a bit. And also, one of the main features is micro-billing. So you only pay for the seconds that your code is running. You're not paying for storing the code. You're not paying for keeping a server up and running that code is running on top of. You're only basically borrowing a little piece of that processing power on the cloud for the seconds that you need it, and you're being billed for that. So let's actually look at this little demo here of serverless at elastic scale. All right. Switch the computers. Back to my laptop. All right. So what I'm going to show you here is this is the entire infrastructure that we're working on today. We have a backend, a website. We have a MongoDB and a SQL Server instances on the back end. On the front here, we have a whole bunch of functions. And they're organized in this thing called a resource group, for those of you who might not be familiar with that. But the first function I want to show you is this one here. It's a function app that I've already created, but it's empty. It's basically empty. It has nothing inside it right now. And it's taking a minute to load up and tell us that there's no functions. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a new function. It's going to be an in-portal function. Continue. We're going to go in and look at more templates. There's a whole bunch of templates you can use to actually create your own functions here. The one we're going to use is HTTP trigger. This is sort of the lowest common denominator of any kind of function you can do. And we're going to call this one HTTP trigger ignite Orlando 2019. Okay, and there's different authorization levels here. In general, you want to have security associated with your function, but this is a demo, so we're actually going to use anonymous access for this function. Okay, so I'm going to create that. And what it's going to do is it's actually just going to create a little hello world function for me. And when I hit it with a URL, it's going to return just a response. So let's just copy this. You get a URL here. Next, we'll go in here. We'll just put and name equals Orlando. Okay. All right, so it says hello Orlando for those of you who can't see it. There it is. So we have now our function, and we know it works. Great. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to hit this with a simulated 100 users, simulating 100 hits on the trigger on the actual website each. So using a tool called Artillery. So let's go in here. I'm just going to go in here and show you the code for this. Whoops. So I've already got this here. I can go there. All right, so this is actually going to hit the site, Artillery. It's going to do 100 simulated users hitting the site 100 times. But before we do that, let's actually get in there and show you. Let's get into monitoring. And let's go into live monitor, so live app metrics. So what this is going to do is gives us live activity on the site as it sits right now. So there it is. We're going to shut down incoming requests because we don't have any. We don't have outgoing requests. We have servers. Oh, actually, we have servers and we have incoming requests. So right now, as you can see, we have one server online, and it's just sitting there waiting for requests because this is a brand new function that we've created through Azure Functions. So now we go over here, and I'm going to hit that Artillery. So Artillery is going to do 100 users, 100 hits per user. Let's do it. Get that started. There we go. Now, there we go. We're starting to see some hits coming in up here. So you see the dots that are going over 100 milliseconds. Those are actually triggering some activity, as you can see here. And that activity should be adding to more servers. Yeah, there we go. 5 servers online. There we are. Good. So we can actually see that. The servers themselves, we'll just close this for now. You get the idea that there's hits coming in. The servers themselves, so we went up to 5 servers so that we could maintain a reasonable functionality. So it went over 100 milliseconds only once. The rest of the time, it's dropped down under 100 milliseconds, and now it's fading off. And as you can see down here, the CPUs are starting to lower. They were about 40% a second ago. Now they're at 2%. So eventually, after a few seconds, our serverless infrastructure is going to realize that these servers are no longer needed. They're at a very low CPU, and it'll start scaling it back again. And you only pay for the, I am personally only paying for the seconds that I use to actually hit that URL. So that's just an example of scaling. This could be hundreds or thousands of servers at any one time. This is a simple little example. All right. So there we are for scale. Let's go back to the slides. So a little bit about functions and components that we have for functions. That we just showed a function, basic function, simple thing. How do you actually tie together a whole bunch of functions or some functions and some database applications or something like that? You can use Logic Apps, which is sort of a codeless or at least minimal code integration and orchestration platform that you could use to link the functions together. And what if you want to scale this? What if we actually had a whole bunch of things happening? I showed you the example with the photos. What if we had 1 million people trying to add items to their wish list all at once. You can set up functions so it triggers on a blob, but if there's a lot of activity, that might actually start to trip over itself eventually. So you want to use something like Event Grid, which is a scalable way to actually manage those types of activities. So anything you want to do with scale, you want to hook Event Grid in between your function. And then any kind of orchestration you want to do, you can use Logic Apps for that. Underneath that, we have a database, we have storage, we have security, IoT. We have a lot of different features that you can use on the back end and access them through your functions and through your Logic Apps and scale them through Event Grid. For developers, we have local development facilities through Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code that you can use. We have integrated DevOps and IDE support. And I showed you the monitoring as well. We also have Visual Debug too. So functions, talking specifically about functions, I gave you an introduction to serverless, and functions themselves are basically the integration of code and events. And that's the reason for the logo as well, by the way. So we've got code and events happening at once, and that becomes Azure Functions. Functions are basically triggered by things, by certain activities, like the ones you see here, and they have bindings, like the ones you see here. So when you add something to blob storage, you can trigger an activity that creates a thumbnail, like I showed you. You could also do something like when someone adds a spreadsheet to blob storage, parse it into CSV and add it to an aggregation application you have. You get the idea. So there's all kinds of things you can do. When you delete something from blob storage, check to make sure it's not a vital piece of information that is needed. You can use a function for that. There's all kinds of activities you can use to trigger functions and then bind it to other things that do some interesting, that have some interesting functionality. All right, so a little bit of a docs alert there. If you want to learn everything you want to know about functions, aka MS FN triggers. So here's some scenarios, just to give you some ideas of what you can use with functions. Now that we've got this platform that you can use to actually build incredible applications that scale and do one thing really well, here's some examples. Every 15 minutes, find and clean invalid data in your log files and produce some clean tables. You know, that used to take a server that was running with timer tasks, and that timer task would have to have access to the logs. In this case, you just go out and say, hey, my log cleaner, go and clean my logs for me. And it would actually go out and do that through functions. When a file's added to blob storage, I already mentioned this one, but files added to blob storage, transform a CSV to data rows and add that to a Power BI chart. Other scenarios, the one that we're actually covering today, photos taken, put it in blob storage, and then create image thumbnails. Another one that most people are familiar with if they're using social media is a page is loaded, and you look at a user's profile and produce ads or other relevant information based on the profiles and the information they have. All right, so thumbnails with functions, I've kind of covered that already, so I'm actually going to show you how you integrate that with Event Grid. But before I do that, let me just show you under the hood of how this actually works. So we have a function. The function itself, that's the Event Grid one. Let's go back here, and let's go to the dashboard. All right, so we have a set of functions. The first function I showed you was just an empty function. These are actually some functions that we built already. So we get a get SAS token that actually helps us with integration and authentication between the web app and our blob storage. And then we get wish list that actually returns that wish list that I showed you in the mobile app that displays the wrench. Make thumbnail event grid. So this is actually the function that creates the thumbnail. The thumbnail itself just calls some C# code. Let's actually have a look at that C# code in Visual Studio Code. And if we look for get thumb. So there it is. So there's get thumbnail image is the C# method that we actually use to call that. All we do from here then, from the actual thumbnail function, we call this C# code. The C# code has a built-in method actually, which is get thumbnail image. And that thumbnail image is returned back to the application, the function, and it writes it to blob storage. The blob storage itself is here. It's pretty basic code. I'm not going to get too deep into the code for this one. I just want to show you how the code works under the hood before we move on to how we actually automate that and scale it with Event Grid. All right, back to the slides. Excuse me. So, enterprise messaging with Event Grid. Modern computing is all about events. Events can be important and cumbersome. I remember this personally myself many years ago. You know, you'd have a data center or a machine under someone's desk or wherever it was. You would have to actually maintain a machine to do some simple little task. And because that simple little task was absolutely vital to the company, you would actually have to have a whole server, even though there was a very small percentage of the CPUs being used for that. And the reason why you'd have to have a small server, or sometimes a cluster of servers, is because there would be a month-end process that would be needing to run to actually do something simple like starting from accounting, produce a general ledger, and then clear out the general ledger from the previous month so it can be filled up with the general ledger for the new month. That would have to be a whole cluster of servers sitting there just for that one process that only ran once a month. It can be cumbersome. What if you could actually just have a facility that managed all of these events for you in one place and triggered activities without actually having to maintain an infrastructure? Well, that's what Event Grid is made for. It's actually fully managed event routing. It's near real-time event delivery at scale, and it's a broad coverage with Azure and beyond. So what I mean by beyond is you can actually integrate it with things outside of the cloud. If you have an on-prem process you're using, you can do that as well. You don't have to have everything in the cloud to make Event Grid work. Event Grid is basically triggered by any kind of event. You can focus on innovation. You can actually just focus on making sure that the purpose of the application is fulfilled. So whatever you're actually building this application to do, or this very simple process, it runs, it scales, and it's secure. You can unlock new scenarios for the apps because you have this new Event Grid facility to do things like that. So that's kind of the idea of what we're showing you here today. We created that wish list functionality without touching the core of the application that runs on the website. So some scenarios. The scenario we're showing you today is the serverless apps. We also have ops automation. So for example, when you have an activity, you have a new server being spun up or something like that, you could actually have your Event Grid notified using Azure Automation and make sure that the compliance and regulations for that server are met. Application integration. You can also integrate apps. 12-factor loosely coupled apps are great. You have microservices all doing things concurrently. However, how do you actually orchestrate and manage all that at scale and securely? You can do that with application integration with Event Grid. So we also have some other things, and these things are important to understand as well and understand the differences. Event hubs. Event hubs are point-in-time data. It's a way of actually doing quick writes and infrequent reads from data. So it's a way of archiving data, storing data, and then having that data available in massive quantities to be analyzed later. Service bus is great for transactions. It's a way of actually managing loosely coupled transactions, loosely coupled systems, and the transactions that they run on, using routing workflow and managing audits. So anything to do with with service bus is actually really, really great for maintaining audit controls and having transaction tracking in the background. Event Grid is more of a pub-sub model, and I'm going to explain what that is in a bit. It's more business logic, it's push, and it has handlers. And there is guaranteed delivery, but it's not 100% structurally auditable transactions like Service Bus is. So some of the concepts when you're working with a pub-sub model, and this includes Event Grid, events are what happened. Event publishers are where that actually took place. Topics are where publishers send events. Event subscriptions is how you receive events. And event handlers is the app or the service reacting to the events. So for example here, we've got some event publishers and some event handlers. We create a subscription that goes in between them. The publisher could be any kind of item that produces an event, basically. And you subscribe to predefined system events. You route those events to endpoints. And then one other feature that is really, really important, you can enable filtering of events. So every time an event happens, you don't necessarily need to have a process on the back end. You can have somebody who's going in and trying to log into a website and then stops at the CAPTCHA and gives up. You want to filter out any kind of events that don't meet the valid requirements of your process. So another feature of Event Grid, we mentioned it's scalable and reliable and secure. Near real time. So everything is sub-second end-to-end latency in the 99th percentile. You can do 10 million events per second per region, up to 100 million subscriptions per region. That's a huge, huge infrastructure. That would be something like high-frequency trading and things like that. Well, high-frequency trading would probably be the only application where this wouldn't be adequate. You have transparent regional failover, which is really nice. If something happens inside a region, one of our Azure regions, it will actually fail over to the next, and you would never know about that. It also has high reliability. So if for some reason in your pub-sub model, a subscriber, a topic, or a publisher goes down, not the system, not the actual Event Grid system, but one of those pieces of the application that you've created for the system. If that goes down, there's a 24-hour retry with exponential backoff, which means that basically it will retry to enact that pub-sub model with that data for that transaction for 24 hours, and then it will actually notify you, of course. So there's high reliability when you're talking about event grids. These are the kinds of things you just can't get with a cluster of databases, a cluster of servers that are running data in a data center or elsewhere. Even if you want to run VMs, this kind of functionality is just not built in and scalable like this. So let's talk about how you actually create the function. So I showed you this app here, which is Make Thumbnail Event Grid. I showed you the Make Thumbnail HTTP. We're actually going to look at Make Thumbnail Event Grid now. And what we do here is to make this an Event Grid enabled function. It's exactly the same function. It uses that get thumbnail method on the back end, but what we do is we say add Event Grid subscription over here. When you add an Event Grid subscription, let's say Ignite subscription. Okay. We're going to use the Event Grid schema. And we're going to use storage. So storage accounts, we're going to choose my subscription. We're going to choose the subscription that we use for this, the resource group that we use for this. And that is MITT at MOD30BB. Okay, and there's only one storage account in here, MOD30BB demo storage. That's the storage account that I showed you here. This is the one that I showed you that we actually posted things into. Okay, so after that, there's different events we can use. we only want this to actually be triggered when blobs are created, not when they're deleted. So once we do that, we can actually create the subscription. I won't add an additional one because we actually already have this created and it's already running. But we have an endpoint here. Instead of accessing the server trigger, I showed you that first, where is it here? I think it's this one where it says Hello Orlando. So each one of these functions has an HTTP endpoint trigger. Instead of using the function trigger endpoint, we're actually going to use the Event Grid trigger endpoint. So this Event Grid trigger endpoint is where you go. That way, there's the Event Grid in between your requests and the actual function, and that will scale for you and manage the scaling across regions if you wanted to. So that's how you actually enable that. We're not actually going to enable that. We already have it actually running. And when I created that photo, that's what you saw when it actually created the image. Okay. So they actually created this, and it generated the thumbnail using the get thumbnail. So anytime you add a photo here, it goes through Event Grid, through the endpoint, checks to see if the photo exists, and then creates it if it doesn't. Okay. Last but not least, we actually, whoops, let's switch. Oh no, I didn't switch the screen. I'll have to show that again. Let me show that again real quick. Okay. Oops. Let me go in here. So I was over here and I went to our app. I'll show this real quick. I went into Make Thumbnail Event Grid. Add Event Grid subscription. This is what I was talking about for those of you who are watching this recording and wondering what happened. And I said make can't remember what I called it, doesn't matter. Orlando. Okay, so that actually creates the endpoint for us once I do a couple different things. So I select storage accounts. I choose my subscription, which is this one. I choose a resource group, which is MITT MOD30BB. And then I show MOD30BB demo storage. And then I actually only want this to happen when we create a blob. And what happens here is when I save this webhook, this actual endpoint here, is what we use in the application. Instead of a functions endpoint, which is like this one, so this functions endpoint here, MOD30BB demo Azure Websites Net, this is actually just accessing a trigger directly through HTTP, which you can do with this as well. However, if we want to actually access it and make it scalable, what we do is we create a new Event Grid webhook URL, and any requests come into the webhook URL first, and then they are passed on to the function. And that way, the actual requests scale and the actual functions scale as well. All right, I have to remember to push that button. Okay. So that's triggering a function with Event Grid. All right. The next thing we have is enterprise integration with Logic Apps. So another thing I mentioned was actually having Logic Apps in our applications. They're fast ways of integrating things together. You can connect applications, data, and services, and you can connect and orchestrate Azure Functions. There's hundreds of connectors for integrations. I'll show you that in a minute. There's a visual workflow designer, which I will show you in a minute as well. And you can basically connect everything together that you like. We have all these providers, which basically allow you to connect to third-party or Microsoft endpoints. We also have on-premise data gateways, which allow you to connect to outside services like SAP, IBM DB2, and others as well. We also have cognitive services. So one of the things we want to show you there is several different options, but we're actually focusing on custom vision today. We're actually going to show you how you can actually interpret a picture and create a description of that picture, which gets added to that wish list, if you recall. All right, so automatic image captioning with cognitive services. Let's get into that. And Bri, remember to show this. Okay. So what we've got here, this one here, this is actually generating our caption for us. There's only a couple things it does, basically. And this is, by the way, this is Logic. This is our actual Logic App Designer. So you go into the function, you go into Logic App Designer, and it creates this for you. Well, we created most of it. So you specify a subscription, you specify a storage account, and the function actually triggers this. So whenever there's a new item added to the blob storage, you parse some JSON here, and then if the subject that we actually posted contains wish lists, so we're only working with wish list functions, so this is the filtering we're talking about, then it's okay, you can pass to the next level of processing. If the subject does not contain _thumb, because we don't want to process descriptions on thumbnails. We already have a description for the main photo. Only main photos get a description. So you get the blob content using the path. And then we actually describe the image content. This little icon here indicates that this is Cognitive Services doing this. And then we have a for each. And the for each basically generates a caption. But we have several other options we could actually use for this as well. Let me go down here. In the update description, captions, caption text, once again, we have a lot of different things we can return. And so basically, it's kind of a combination, if you get the idea here for Logic Apps, of code and predefined pieces of functionality from Cognitive Services. Once again, that little blue thing indicates this is actually Cognitive Services, which is returning this data. You get a unique key from Cognitive Services, and there's a free level for this. You pass that key with the photo to your Cognitive Services processor, and it returns one of many options. It can return a body, it can return captions. In this case, we're doing captions, caption text. You can have a confidence score. How sure is it that, how sure is Cognitive Services that this is what it says it is? Then you have a captions item, there's a description, and you can actually process tag names as well. And there's a whole bunch of other things you can do here. But basically, we're just going and retrieving the captions text from this one. And when you do that, that's how you actually get that, it said close-up of a tool in the actual captions. All right. Well, that's just a little example of Event Grid. Next thing I want to show you is another Logic app, and this one is social media integration with Logic Apps. So this one's a little more involved, and I'm also going to show you how we integrate the mobile app with this as well. So let's go back. The mobile app itself, let's see, here it is. Okay, so social integration is another inside of our functions. You go into Logic App Designer. Basically any tweet that you process using this, if you see the Twitter icon here, we're using a connector that goes out. And these connectors are actually in Microsoft Docs, and you can see we have a number of them, and all kinds of applications, third party and Microsoft. And we're going to get down to Twitter eventually. As you can see, there are a couple. Twitter. Okay, so this is the Twitter connector, and this is something you can choose straight into Logic App, and it has some information about what you can get here. Get followers, get following. When you post a tweet, you can actually have it search. So in this case, we're searching tweets for anything that says oh, the wrong one. There we go. Anything that's from bbenz, me. So I'm going to tweet in a second, and you're going to see it show up as a notification on my mobile app, and I'll explain how that works. So the first thing we do is we actually initialize some variables. We have an owner name that's called Microsoft CDA. We have a variable here, which is app name, and that's Tailwind Traders. So that's the name of the app. I am not going to click on this third item here because this actually contains a unique ID of the application. And that's how you actually link the applications together. So if I go here, this application that I showed you is not registered through the official iOS or Android app stores. This is using App Center, and appcenter.ms is where you go for that. And this is a listing of the apps that I have registered. If I go to here, Tailwind Traders, there's the Tailwind Traders Android app. And there's several different options for it. But in this case, we're using the Tailwind Traders Android app. That's the one I show you on screen. And this has a unique ID. And when Twitter actually sees a tweet, it's going to do a search every 3 minutes. And I'm going to trigger it manually so it does it sooner. Whenever it sees a tweet, it's going to send a notification to the unique ID that's in here. That unique ID is actually picked up by App Center and passed through the application to my mobile. And that's how that works. All right. And then with the HTTP, basically it just posts, and we've got a little body that it shows in the notification that talks about the tweet text and the tweet by and the time it was created. All right, and there's no authentication for this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a tweet. Twitter. Okay, Bri. All right. Where's that? There it is. Okay. Let's say, hello, Orlando. Great to be at MS Ignite and showing off Tailwind Traders. Okay. I spelled everything. Okay. So all I need to do is just tweet this, basically. All right, so let's go back into our app here. And as you can see from the visor, the visor is the app that actually does this. Oh, this might actually have already picked up the notification, so let's see. No, that was my older notification. It just told me to come and see this session if you want to come and check out the repeat. So let's trigger. Let's run this. Okay. Now this sometimes takes a minute. So let's keep doing this. I will refresh this a little. Sometimes it takes a second. Let's trigger it again. Okay, successfully checked the trigger. Good. All right. We're going to give it another second. Sometimes this just takes a little while. Yep. All right, we're going to continue with the presentation, and we'll come back to that, because it should be there soon. Well, we'll just wrap up. So in summary, Azure Functions to scale and extend without infrastructure overhead, Event Grid for messaging, Logic Apps for integration, Cognitive Services for cloud intelligence. And if you want more information on any of this or want to use the source code, check out ACA-MS MOD30. There's a Learn Alert. We have pre-scheduled, you probably know by now, we have predefined learning paths that you can go through, and they do relate to certifications. Okay, you can get a free certification exam if you follow that URL at Ignite. There's the resources again, including mine, Brian Benz, Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. Please do check those out. And please evaluate this session. Okay, so let's actually check out. That's the last slide. Let's make sure that this actually worked. There it is. Oh no, that's not it. Clear all. Let's do that. And let's close this down so it's in the open position. All right. It runs every 3 minutes. Oh, successfully checked the trigger. So that's good. No, not yet. Sometimes it takes a second. Run. Okay. Well, if this didn't work, I think we're just going to skip it. And you're going to have to take my word for it that it works. Yeah, still not there. Too bad. I don't see it. Sometimes it takes a few seconds. It depends on the Wi-Fi and a few other things. But anyway, that's the session, and thanks for coming.